They had the talent, the charm, the stage presence that could silence a crowd of thousands. But behind the music, behind the rhinestone suits and soulful lyrics, there were battles no spotlight could illuminate. These 20 country legends didn't just die, they suffered. From slow-burning cancers to devastating brain disorders, their final days were marked by unimaginable pain. In this video, we honor their legacy, but also uncover the grim truths that robbed them of their last moments. But all of them shared one haunting fate. 1. Keith Whitley, alcoholism. That silently killed. Keith Whitley wasn't just a rising star in country music. He was a force. With a voice that could bleed sorrow and soul into every line, he was poised to become one of the greats. But beneath that smoky vocal tone and laid-back charm was a man battling demons no one could quite reach. Whitley suffered from severe alcohol addiction. Friends and colleagues often worried, but Whitley kept much of it hidden beneath his smooth exterior. On May 9, 1989, just as his career was gaining unstoppable momentum, Keith was found dead in his Nashville home. The official cause? Acute alcohol poisoning. His blood alcohol content was an astonishing 0.47%, nearly 5 times the legal limit. He was only 34. His death devastated the country music world. Loretta Lynn, Vince Gill, and Garth Brooks all cited him as a once-in-a-generation talent lost too soon. But what made his death even more heartbreaking was how preventable it was. The disease consumed slowly, quietly, until it finally won. Keith Whitley's story is a haunting reminder of how addiction can steal even the brightest flame. 2. Tammy Wynette, a life of pain and prescription pills. Tammy Wynette, the first lady of country music, seemed invincible on stage, poised, powerful, and proudly heartbroken in every lyric. Her anthem, "Stand By Your Man," became a defining voice for country women everywhere. But offstage, Tammy's life was a constant war against illness and unimaginable physical pain. Throughout her career, Tammy underwent more than 30 major surgeries. She suffered from chronic abdominal pain that doctors struggled to properly diagnose for decades. To cope, she was prescribed a staggering combination of painkillers, sedatives, and sleeping medications, often simultaneously. It became a toxic cocktail that she depended on to survive each day. Her health only declined in the 90s. Hospital visits became more frequent. In 1998, she died in her sleep at just 55 years old. The initial report said it was a blood clot, but later investigations revealed massive amounts of prescription drugs in her system. Her death sparked controversy, lawsuits, and a closer look at the dangerous over-medication of celebrities. Tammy's voice was mighty, but her body was a battlefield. Her tragic end reminded the world that even legends aren't immune to silent suffering. 3. Joe Diffie, struck down by COVID-19. Joe Diffie was known for bringing humor, heart, and honky-tonk swagger to the 90s country scene. With hits like Pickup Man and John Deere Green, he was a fan favorite, celebrated for his mullet, his smile, and his deep baritone voice. But in 2020, his death shocked the entire country music world. On March 27, 2020, Diffie publicly announced he had tested positive for COVID-19 and was receiving medical care. Just 2 days later, he died from complications related to the virus. He was only 61. Fans were stunned. There was no long illness, no goodbye tour, no time to prepare. One moment, he was part of the fabric of classic country radio. The next, he was gone, claimed by a virus that was only beginning to reveal its terrifying power. His death was among the first high-profile losses in country music due to the pandemic, and it became a wake-up call. Joe Diffie didn't fade away over years. He was taken in a matter of days. His passing left a void, a silence that echoed far beyond Nashville. Number 4. Naomi Judd, depression that turned deadly. Naomi Judd was one half of the beloved mother-daughter duo The Judds, a Grammy-winning act that defined country music in the 80s and early 90s. With her daughter Winona, Naomi sang about heartbreak, hope, and family, but few knew the emotional torment that raged within her. For years, Naomi battled severe treatment-resistant depression, a condition that robbed her of peace, joy, and in the end, her will to live. She openly spoke about her struggles with mental illness in interviews and in her memoir, River of Time, describing a constant, suffocating darkness. Antidepressants, therapy, electroconvulsive treatments, none brought lasting relief. On April 30th, 2022, just one day before she was to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, Naomi took her own life at age 76. Her family confirmed the truth in a painfully raw statement, saying, "We lost our beautiful mother to the disease of mental illness." Her death wasn't from a visible disease like cancer or infection, but from something far more silent and equally lethal. Naomi's passing forced a conversation about mental health in country music and about how even the most luminous souls can be consumed by invisible pain. Number 5. Johnny Cash, a body ravaged by disease. The Man in Black wasn't just a country icon. He was a symbol of endurance, grit, and redemption. But even Johnny Cash, with his deep voice and rebellious spirit, couldn't outrun the devastating toll of chronic illness. His body was his battleground, and the fight was brutal. In his later years, Cash suffered from multiple health conditions, including diabetes, shy-dragger syndrome, a degenerative neurological disorder, and ultimately, autonomic neuropathy, a complication from diabetes that wreaked havoc on his nervous system. He experienced tremors, slurred speech, and needed assistance walking. His once commanding presence on stage diminished into a frail figure, often confined to a wheelchair. Despite it all, he kept recording, pouring his mortality into stripped-down albums that left listeners in tears. But as his conditions worsened, his immune system grew weaker. In 2003, just 4 months after his wife June Carter passed, Johnny Cash died of diabetes-related complications at age 71. His death was not sudden. It was the slow, relentless unraveling of a legend. But he fought to the very end, his voice growing more fragile, yet more powerful with every song he sang from his hospital bed. Number 6. Patsy Cline, undiagnosed illness and a doomed final flight. Though her death is forever tied to the plane crash that ended her life at just 30, few fans realize that Patsy Cline was already suffering from significant health issues in her final years. Behind that iconic voice, strong cheekbones, and steel-eyed confidence was a woman who was often in pain and frequently brushed it off. In 1961, Cline survived a horrific head-on car collision that left her with a jagged scar across her forehead, a broken wrist, and severe internal injuries, including a dislocated hip that never fully healed. She suffered chronic pain and migraines afterward, and many close to her said she never really felt the same physically. But the most eerie detail? In the months leading up to her tragic 1963 crash, Patsy allegedly told multiple people, including her mother and fellow singer Loretta Lynn, that she knew she was going to die soon. She began putting her affairs in order. Her final recordings, such as Sweet Dreams, carried an otherworldly sadness. Though her official cause of death was trauma from the plane crash, many believe that Cline was already carrying the wear and tear of untreated, hidden injuries that made her last years quietly excruciating. Number 7. Freddy Fender, a voice silenced by lung cancer. Freddy Fender brought a unique, Tejano-infused flavor to country music with hits like Before the Next Teardrop Falls and Wasted Days and Wasted Nights. His smooth, soulful voice and crossover appeal made him a trailblazer for Hispanic artists in the genre. But behind the bright melodies and fame was a man slowly being consumed by disease. In the early 2000s, Fender was diagnosed with lung cancer, a devastating blow for a singer whose gift relied on breath and strength. He had already undergone a kidney transplant in 2002 and a liver transplant in 2004, both results of years of substance abuse and underlying health complications. But the lung cancer was different. It was final. He continued performing as long as his health allowed, but by 2005, he announced that he had incurable cancer and was entering what he called the winding down of my life. On October 14, 2006, Freddy Fender passed away at age 69. His death was mourned deeply in both the country and Latino music communities. He had given everything to his fans, even when his own body was failing him. The way Freddy faced death, with honesty, humility, and grace, was as unforgettable as his voice. 8. Dottie West, trauma, surgeries, and a tragic end. Dottie West was a trailblazer, the first female country artist to win a Grammy and one of the genre's most stylish and powerful vocalists. But her later years were marked by mounting tragedy, poverty, and a final chain of events that led to her death. One rooted in physical trauma rather than illness, but no less horrifying. In August 1991, Dottie was on her way to perform at the Grand Ole Opry when her car broke down. A neighbor offered to drive her, but on the way there, he took a sharp turn at over 55 mph, crashing into a concrete wall. Dottie was thrown from the car and suffered multiple internal injuries, including a ruptured spleen, lacerated liver, and severe damage to her intestines. Though she initially survived the crash, the following 5 days were torturous. Dottie underwent several surgeries, each more desperate than the last, but infection set in. She went into septic shock and died on September 4th, 1991, at the age of 58. Her death wasn't from a long illness, but from an agonizing, drawn-out battle with trauma and surgical complications. The pain she endured in those final hours was brutal, far from the spotlight and applause that once lit up her life. 9. Boxcar Willie, a gentle legend lost to leukemia. Boxcar Willie, real name Lucille Travis Martin, wasn't flashy or rebellious. He was humble, soft-spoken, and beloved for his down-home image of a train-hopping troubadour. With his overalls, scruffy beard, and kind smile, he represented a simpler, more honest version of country music. But his real-life final journey was anything but simple. In the late 1990s, Boxcar Willie was diagnosed with leukemia, a cancer of the blood and bone marrow that can be slow-burning, but deadly. At first, he tried to fight it quietly, not wanting to alarm fans. He kept performing in Branson, Missouri, where he had become a fixture. But as the disease progressed, it drained him. His body weakened, his signature voice thinned, and eventually the fatigue and pain became unbearable. He passed away on April 12, 1999, at the age of 67. To his fans, the news was crushing. The man who had brought them joy through simple songs and a gentle spirit was gone, claimed by a ruthless illness that stole his strength little by little. Even in death, Boxcar Willie reminded everyone that sometimes the quietest stars endure the hardest battles. 10. Glen Campbell, a mind fading into darkness. Glen Campbell's music transcended generations. With classics like Rhinestone Cowboy and Gentle on My Mind, he became one of the most beloved figures in country pop history. But in the end, it wasn't his voice or his body that failed him. It was his mind, slowly unraveling due to Alzheimer's disease. In 2011, Glen publicly announced his diagnosis. Instead of hiding, he did something extraordinary. He went on a farewell tour, performing while he could still remember the lyrics, still find the melody. Fans watched with awe and heartbreak as the disease chipped away at a man they thought would never fade. Over the next 6 years, Alzheimer's took its toll. Glen lost his ability to speak, to recognize loved ones, even to play guitar, his most cherished talent. He spent his final years in a memory care facility, far removed from the spotlight he had owned for decades. He died on August 8, 2017, at the age of 81. His final album, Adios, was recorded while he still had clarity, and it stands as a haunting goodbye. Glen Campbell's death wasn't fast or shocking. It was slow, cruel, and deeply sad, a legend undone not by scandal or substance, but by silence. 11. Mindy McCready, a life torn apart by mental illness. Mindy McCready burst onto the scene in the mid-1990s with a voice full of promise and a future that seemed unstoppable. Her debut album went double platinum, and hits like 10,000 Angels made her a radio staple. But fame came too fast, and the demons came with it. Mindy struggled for years with depression, substance abuse, and suicidal thoughts. Her life was a whirlwind of tabloid scandals, arrests, custody battles, and failed rehab attempts. But behind the headlines was a woman desperately trying to hold on. In 2010, after the death of her longtime partner, David Wilson, whose death was also ruled a suicide, Mindy's mental health collapsed completely. Just weeks later, she died by suicide at her Arkansas home. She was only 37. The final act was even more devastating. She ended her life on the same porch where Wilson had died, with their baby inside the home. Her voice had once soared, full of vulnerability and hope, but it couldn't outlast the illness that tormented her. Mindy McCready's story isn't just tragic, it's infuriating. A star who had everything, lost to a disease that too often goes untreated until it's too late. Hank Williams, a young star destroyed by chronic pain and addiction. Few names in country music carry the mythic weight of Hank Williams. He was the original outlaw, the tortured genius who gave us I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry and Your Cheating Heart. But behind the legend was a young man suffering deeply, physically and emotionally. From an early age, Hank struggled with spina bifida occulta, a painful spinal condition that doctors at the time had little understanding of. The constant radiating back pain made long performances and relentless touring brutal. To cope, Hank turned to alcohol and morphine, which offered temporary relief but spiraled into full-blown addiction. As his fame grew, so did his dependency. He was often too drunk or drugged to perform, getting fired from the Grand Ole Opry in 1952. Doctors tried everything, but by 29, Hank's body was failing him. He died in the backseat of a Cadillac on New Year's Day, 1953, en route to a concert. The cause of death was officially listed as heart failure, but it was the result of years of alcoholism, drug use, and untreated medical conditions. What makes Hank's story so haunting is how young he was, only 29, but how deeply his pain colored every word he wrote. He didn't just sing about loneliness and suffering. He lived it, and ultimately, it killed him. How 13. Charlie Rich, Diabetes and the Slow Decline of a Country Crooner. Charlie Rich was known as the Silver Fox, a smooth, soulful singer whose style blurred the lines between country, jazz, blues, and pop. His 1973 hit, The Most Beautiful Girl, topped both country and pop charts, earning him crossover fame. But as his success waned in the 80s, Charlie began battling something far more insidious than industry trends: diabetes. For years, Rich's health quietly deteriorated. He kept his condition mostly private, but those close to him noticed the changes. He was fatigued, more withdrawn, and often in pain. Complications from diabetes began to take their toll, affecting his circulation and heart. He suffered from neuropathy, the nerve damage that causes chronic pain, numbness, and mobility issues, and he struggled with weight gain and erratic blood sugar levels. In 1995, while traveling through Louisiana with his wife, Charlie fell seriously ill. He was rushed to a hospital in Hammond and died in his sleep of a pulmonary embolism, a deadly blood clot that doctors linked to his worsening diabetic condition. He was 62. Though his voice never truly left the hearts of fans, Charlie Rich's death was a somber reminder of how chronic disease can slowly erase even the most vibrant stars. There was no dramatic fall from grace, just a gradual, painful retreat from the spotlight until silence took over. 14. Mel Street, a secret battle with mental illness and chronic pain. Mel Street's voice had the raw, aching twang that seemed tailor-made for country's most painful ballads. Songs like Borrowed Angel and Lovin' on Back Streets spoke of betrayal, heartbreak, and longing, but few knew how closely those lyrics mirrored the man behind them. Because Mel wasn't just singing about pain, he was living it. Behind the scenes, Street battled severe depression and chronic physical ailments, including persistent gastrointestinal problems that left him in constant discomfort. Doctors at the time failed to give him clear answers, and like many performers of his era, Mel turned to alcohol and painkillers to dull both the emotional and physical agony. But the real tragedy came in how deeply he hid it all. In public, he smiled and performed. In private, he unraveled. On October 21st, 1978, his 43rd birthday, Mel Street died by suicide at his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. He left behind a wife, children, and a legacy of music that now felt eerily prophetic. His death shocked the country music world, especially those who had no idea how far gone he truly was. The details were heartbreaking. He had spoken to friends just hours before. He had new music in the works, but none of it could silence the voices in his head. Mel Street's story is a chilling testament to how mental illness, when coupled with chronic physical pain, can silently destroy even the most gifted artists, unless someone intervenes in time. 15. Jim Reeves, Respiratory Illnesses and a Fatal Flight into Tragedy. Jim Reeves was the velvet voice of country music, nicknamed Gentleman Jim for his polished image and smooth vocal delivery. He brought country to a more refined, pop-influenced audience with hits like He'll Have to Go and Welcome to My World. But beneath that elegance was a man quietly suffering from chronic respiratory issues and a fatal sense of control. Reeves had a history of sinus infections, bronchitis, and severe allergies, all of which affected his ability to perform. He was frequently prescribed medications to manage the inflammation and pain, but his condition lingered. Traveling frequently, often by small private planes, didn't help. The altitude shifts, pressure changes, and exposure to dust and smoke worsened his symptoms. On July 31st, 1964, Reeves was flying his private Beechcraft aircraft through a thunderstorm in Nashville when the plane crashed, killing both him and his business partner. He was just 40 years old. But many fans don't realize that Jim shouldn't have been flying at all. Several accounts noted that Reeves had vertigo episodes and compromised breathing in the days prior, likely aggravated by his chronic respiratory problems. Some believe these conditions impaired his spatial awareness during the flight, contributing to the crash. His death was sudden, but the conditions that led to it were long ignored. Jim Reeves may have looked immaculate on stage, but offstage he was battling ailments that quietly made every performance more painful, and ultimately, every risk more deadly. 16. Faron Young, prostate cancer, depression, and a final act of despair. Faron Young was known as the hillbilly heartthrob, a sharp-tongued, hard-living honky-tonk singer who delivered hits like Hello Walls and Live Fast, Love Hard, Die Young. But in the end, those lyrics became a chilling prophecy. Because Young's death wasn't just about illness, it was about a life overtaken by pain, bitterness, and regret. By the early 1990s, Faron had been diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, a disease that caused him immense physical suffering. The treatments were grueling, and the side effects, loss of control, fatigue, humiliation, cut deep for a man known for his pride and bravado. But his physical pain was only half the story. As his health deteriorated, Young grew increasingly isolated and depressed. His career had slowed, the industry had moved on, and he felt forgotten. Friends said he became angry, withdrawn, and nostalgic for the days when he was a household name. On December 9th, 1996, Faron Young shot himself at his home in Nashville. He died the following day at age 64. In his suicide note, he expressed frustration with his declining health and bitterness toward the music industry. Faron Young's death wasn't just about cancer. It was about the psychological toll of illness, aging, and being left behind. His story is a stark reminder that fame doesn't protect you from pain. Sometimes it only makes it worse. 17. Eddy Arnold, a long battle with arteriosclerosis. Eddy Arnold was one of the most successful country artists of all time, with a career spanning 6 decades and over 85 million records sold. Known as the Tennessee Plowboy, he brought country music into living rooms across America with his soft baritone and polished style. But in his final years, Eddy faced a slow, debilitating decline due to arteriosclerosis, a hardening of the arteries that gradually affects the brain and body. As Arnold aged, the disease impacted his circulation and cognitive abilities. Once a commanding presence on stage and in interviews, he became forgetful, frail, and increasingly dependent on those around him. Friends and family noticed that the sparkle in his eye had faded. His once sharp memory dulled, and his speech became halting. Though he had officially retired from performing in the early 2000s, Eddy remained active behind the scenes until arteriosclerosis took that away too. The disease slowly robbed him of movement, clarity, and independence. In 2008, he lost his beloved wife Sally after more than 60 years of marriage. Just 2 months later, on May 8, 2008, Eddy Arnold passed away at the age of 89. His death was not sudden or dramatic, but deeply sad. It was the gradual, quiet erasure of a man who had once stood tall in rhinestones before packed theaters. In the end, Eddy Arnold was defeated not by scandal or self-destruction, but by time, biology, and a disease that dims the lights slowly, one by one. 18. Troy Gentry, Cancer in the Shadows, Death in the Sky. Troy Gentry, one half of the hit duo Montgomery Gentry, was a modern-day country star with a rough-edged voice and an electric stage presence. While he was tragically killed in a helicopter crash in 2017, few fans realized that even before the accident, Gentry had been secretly fighting cancer, a personal struggle he had kept largely out of the public eye. In the months leading up to his death, Gentry had undergone multiple medical tests and procedures after discovering irregularities in his prostate and lymph nodes. Though he hadn't made a formal public announcement, those closest to him later revealed he was receiving treatment for what doctors believed to be early-stage cancer, possibly lymphoma or prostate-related. While still performing and recording, Gentry was quietly navigating a medical landscape filled with biopsies, monitoring, and emotional strain. His bandmate and close friend, Eddie Montgomery, later admitted that Gentry was growing more introspective, talking about legacy, family, and faith with a new urgency. Then came the flight. On September 8, 2017, just hours before a scheduled performance in New Jersey, the helicopter he was riding in suffered mechanical failure. The crash was brutal and sudden. He was just 50. Fans remember the crash, but many don't know that cancer was already in the picture, casting a long shadow. His death was doubly tragic, a man facing one battle taken too soon by another, and the fight he was quietly preparing for never had a chance to begin. 19. Ernest Tubb, emphysema and a voice lost to smoke. Ernest Tubb was one of the founding fathers of honky-tonk music. With his unmistakable Texas drawl and twangy electric guitar, he paved the way for generations of country artists. His biggest hit, Walking the Floor Over You, revolutionized the genre and earned him a permanent place in country music history. But his legendary voice was eventually stolen by the very habit he carried with him on and off the stage: smoking. For decades, Tubb was a heavy smoker. Cigarettes were part of the culture, backstage, on buses, even mid-interview. But by the 1960s, the damage had begun. He developed emphysema, a chronic and progressive lung disease that made breathing painful and singing nearly impossible. His once robust voice became raspy, then breathy, and eventually faded into whispers. Tubb, ever the showman, refused to stop touring. He'd cough his way through sets, needing oxygen off stage. His bandmates often recalled how he'd be gasping for air between songs, clutching his chest, but still refusing to cancel a show. Fans noticed, but many didn't understand how deeply his lungs were deteriorating. By the early 1980s, Ernest Tubb had no choice but to retire. He died on September 6, 1984, at the age of 70 from complications related to emphysema. In the end, it wasn't scandal or heartbreak that ended his story. It was the slow, unrelenting suffocation of a man whose life revolved around air, breath, and song. Ernest Tubb was quite literally silenced by the smoke that had once been his comfort.